Rain had been falling since dusk, not the gentle kind that washed the streets clean, but a relentless downpour that soaked everything it touched. The sky was a deep, restless gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the earth. Each drop hit the pavement with sharp urgency, echoing through empty streets like unanswered questions. Streetlights flickered, their yellow glow trembling in the rain, casting long, broken reflections on the wet road. The young man walked alone. His clothes clung to his body, drenched through, his shoes squelching with every step. His hair was plastered to his forehead, water running down his face, making it impossible to tell whether the moisture there came from the rain or something deeper. He had been trying to get home for hours, but the buses had stopped running, and there was no sign of a taxi anywhere. His phone battery was nearly dead and the signal had faded long ago. Home felt impossibly far away, more like a memory than a destination. He wrapped his arms around himself, not just to keep warm, but to hold together the pieces of his courage that felt like they were slipping apart. There was something about rain that made loneliness louder. Every step he took seemed to echo his isolation, as though the world itself was reminding him that he had no one walking beside him. He didn't know this neighborhood well. The familiar streets had long disappeared behind him, replaced by narrow lanes and quiet houses pressed close together. Most of the windows were dark, the families inside already sheltered from the storm, sharing warmth and stories, unaware of the stranger passing through their street. The young man felt like an outsider, moving through a world that wasn't meant for him. The rain intensified as if the sky had decided to empty itself all at once. Thunder rolled in the distance, deep and low, vibrating through his chest. He stopped walking for a moment, standing under a flickering streetlight, breathing heavily. His legs ached, his body shivered, and exhaustion wrapped around him like a heavy coat. Just a little farther, he whispered to himself, though he had no idea how far that really was. Memories surfaced uninvited. The silence of his small apartment. The routine days that blurred together. The sense that something was missing in his life, something he could never quite name. He had always told himself he was fine on his own, that independence was strength. But standing there, soaked and trembling in the rain, that belief felt fragile. He started walking again, slower now, his steps unsteady. That was when he noticed it. At the end of the lane stood an old house, slightly set apart from the others. Unlike the surrounding homes, this one wasn't completely dark. A soft, warm light glowed from behind its curtains, steady and calm, like a quiet invitation. The house looked worn, its walls marked by time, its wooden door faded and scratched. Yet there was something comforting about it, something that made the young man slow his pace. He stopped across the street, staring at the door. 1,000 thoughts rushed through his mind. Was anyone home? Would it be rude to knock? What if they turned him away? He imagined the embarrassment, the rejection, standing once again alone in the rain. His hand trembled as he shoved it into his pocket, searching for warmth that wasn't there. Another crack of thunder decided for him. He crossed the street quickly, his heart pounding louder than the storm. Standing on the small porch, he hesitated, listening to the rain hammer the roof above him. The light inside the house remained steady, unbothered by the chaos outside. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hand and knocked. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet lane, 3 soft knocks swallowed by the rain. He waited, holding his breath. Seconds stretched painfully long. He was just about to turn away when he heard movement from inside. Slow footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. The door creaked open. Warm air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of tea and old wood. For a brief moment, the young man felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: relief. He looked up, rain dripping from his lashes, unaware that this single knock, made out of desperation, was about to change the direction of his life in ways he could never have imagined. Behind him, the rain continued to fall, washing away the road he had walked, as if the night itself was closing the door on his past. Ahead of him was shelter, light, and the quiet promise of something unknown. And so, in the middle of a storm, a journey far greater than the distance between two homes had begun. The door opened slowly, as if time itself had decided to pause for a moment. Standing in the doorway was an old man, tall but slightly bent with age, his posture shaped by years of quiet endurance. A dim yellow bulb behind him cast a warm halo around his figure, softening the lines on his face. His hair was silver, neatly combed back, and his beard, white and well-kept, rested gently against his chest. Deep lines marked his forehead and cheeks, not harshly, but like careful signatures left behind by a long, thoughtful life. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The young man stood there, drenched, water dripping from his clothes onto the wooden porch. He suddenly became acutely aware of how he must look, tired, soaked, uninvited. His heart raced and words tangled in his throat. He almost apologized before saying anything else, unsure of what he was apologizing for, the intrusion, the rain, or simply his own existence at that moment. The old man's eyes studied him quietly. They were dark and steady, holding neither suspicion nor fear, only a calm curiosity. He did not rush. He did not ask questions right away. Instead, he opened the door a little wider, allowing more light to spill out into the rain-soaked night. "Yes?" the old man finally said, his voice low and gentle, carrying a softness that immediately eased some of the young man's tension. The young man cleared his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you. My home is very far from here, and the rain?" He gestured helplessly toward the street behind him, where water streamed along the edges of the road. "There's no transport, and I don't think I can make it back tonight." The words came out awkwardly, rushed and uneven. He expected refusal. He had already prepared himself for it. The old man remained silent for a moment, listening carefully, as though the rain itself were part of the conversation. His gaze softened, and a faint smile touched the corner of his lips, not amusement but understanding. "You're soaked," the old man said simply. "Yes," the young man replied, feeling suddenly foolish for stating the obvious. "If it's not possible, I understand. I just thought I'd ask." The old man glanced briefly at the sky, where rain continued to fall without mercy, then back at the young man. He sighed, not in irritation but with the weight of memory. "No one should be left outside in weather like this," he said quietly. "Come in." The young man froze. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, the old man stepped aside, holding the door open wider. The invitation was clear, and it felt strangely final, as if something important had already been decided. "Come in before you catch cold," the old man repeated. Gratitude flooded the young man's chest so suddenly it almost hurt. "Thank you," he said, stepping inside. "Thank you so much." The door closed behind him with a soft click, shutting out the roar of the rain. The silence inside the house felt profound, almost sacred. The warmth wrapped around him instantly, seeping into his skin, loosening the tight knot that had been sitting in his chest all evening. The house was old but lovingly kept. The wooden floor creaked gently underfoot as though acknowledging each step. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, some worn, some yellowed with age. Framed photographs hung quietly between them, moments frozen in time. Younger faces, smiles that hinted at stories no longer spoken aloud. "Leave your shoes there," the old man said, pointing toward a small mat near the door. "I'll get you a towel." Before the young man could respond, the old man disappeared down a narrow hallway. The young man stood awkwardly, unsure of where to place his hands, listening to the distant sound of cupboards opening. He realized how tense he had been, how tightly he had been holding himself together. Slowly his shoulders dropped. The old man returned with a clean towel and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, just an accidental touch, but it sent an unexpected jolt through the young man, not of fear but of awareness. He wrapped the towel around his shoulders, breathing in the faint scent of soap and old paper. "Sit," the old man said, gesturing toward a wooden chair near a small table. "I'll put the kettle on." As the old man moved about the kitchen, the young man observed him quietly. There was a calm rhythm to his movements, unhurried and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. He seemed comfortable with silence, not threatened by it. "I'm sorry for arriving so late," the young man said softly. "I didn't know where else to go." "You came to the right place," the old man replied without turning around. The young man looked up, surprised. "How do you know?" The old man paused, then smiled faintly. "Because you knocked." Tea soon steamed between them, the cups warming their hands. Outside, the rain continued, but it sounded distant now, like a story being told somewhere else. The old man finally sat across from him, meeting his gaze fully. "My name is—" he hesitated for just a fraction of a second before continuing. "I live alone here." The young man nodded. He introduced himself, his voice steadier now. They exchanged a simple handshake, firm, respectful. Yet in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither fully understood. The young man realized that this was no ordinary act of kindness. There was a quiet depth in the old man's presence, a sense that he carried many stories within him. And the old man, watching the young man sip his tea, seemed to sense something familiar in his tired eyes, something he himself had once been. The door had opened not just to shelter from the rain, but to a connection neither of them had been searching for, yet both somehow needed. The rain continued outside, steady and unyielding, tapping against the windows like a patient listener. Inside the house, the warmth had settled into every corner, wrapping the two men in a quiet sense of safety. The small wooden table between them held their cups of tea, steam rising slowly, carrying with it the scent of herbs and comfort. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward, it was the kind that allows thoughts to breathe. The young man took a careful sip of his tea. It was warm, soothing, grounding him in the moment. He hadn't realized how cold he had been until now. He glanced up at the old man who sat across from him with his hands folded loosely in his lap, his gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. "It rains like this often here," the old man said at last, his voice calm. "Especially this time of year." The young man nodded. "I didn't expect it to be this heavy." "Rain has a way of surprising people," the old man replied, a faint smile appearing. "Just like life." The young man smiled politely, then looked down at his cup. Something about the old man's tone, gentle but knowing, made him feel as though he was being invited into a deeper conversation. He hesitated, then spoke. "Thank you again," he said. "Most people wouldn't have opened the door." The old man shrugged lightly. "Most people are afraid of strangers," he said. "I'm not." "Why not?" the young man asked before he could stop himself. The old man turned to look at him fully now. His eyes held no judgment, only a quiet depth. "Because once, a very long time ago, I was a stranger knocking on someone else's door." The words lingered in the air. The young man felt a gentle curiosity stir within him. "What happened?" he asked. The old man leaned back slightly, his gaze returning to the window. "I was young. Lost. Thought I knew everything," he said softly. "That night changed my life. Just like tonight may be changing yours." The young man felt a strange shiver, not from the cold but from the weight of the moment. He hadn't expected such honesty. He realized then that the old man wasn't simply offering shelter. He was offering presence. They talked slowly at first, small things. The neighborhood. The quietness of the street. The way time seemed to move differently at night. Each sentence gently opened the door to the next, until the conversation began to flow naturally, like the rain outside. The young man spoke about his life. About his work that paid the bills but never filled the emptiness inside him. About days that felt repetitive, and nights that felt too long. He admitted things he rarely said aloud, that sometimes he felt invisible, as though he was simply passing through life instead of truly living it. The old man listened without interrupting. He did not offer quick solutions or empty encouragement. He simply listened, nodding occasionally, his attention unwavering. "That kind of loneliness," the old man said gently, "is not caused by being alone. It comes from not being understood." The young man felt his throat tighten. "Yes," he whispered. "That's exactly it." The old man then began to speak of his own past. He spoke of love that had come too late, of choices shaped by fear, of years spent following paths that others had chosen for him. His voice did not carry regret, but reflection, a calm acceptance of what had been. "I spent a long time believing I had missed my chance," he said. "That some doors once closed never open again." The young man looked at him. "Do you still believe that?" The old man smiled slowly. "No. I believe doors open when we finally have the courage to knock." The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passage of time. Midnight came and went unnoticed. The rain softened, no longer a storm but a steady whisper. They laughed quietly at moments, small genuine laughs that felt rare and precious. The young man was surprised by how easy it was to speak here, in this old house, with this man he had met only hours ago. There was no pressure to impress, no need to explain himself fully. He could simply be. At one point the old man refilled their cups. As he handed the tea to the young man, their fingers brushed again. This time neither pulled away immediately. It was a brief, innocent moment, but it carried a warmth that lingered longer than expected. The young man became aware of something shifting inside him, a sense of comfort that went beyond gratitude. He felt seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I've talked to people my whole life, but tonight feels different." The old man met his eyes. "Some conversations are not about words," he said. "They're about recognition." Outside, the rain finally began to ease, the storm slowly releasing its grip on the night. Inside, something new had taken root. Not love, not yet, but something just as important. Trust. As the young man leaned back in his chair, a calm settled over him. He no longer felt like a guest waiting to leave. He felt welcomed. And in that quiet, rain-soaked house, Two lonely lives began to intertwine, laying the foundation for a friendship neither of them knew they had been waiting for. The night had grown deeper, heavier with silence. The clock on the wall marked the hours with soft, patient ticks, each one echoing through the room like a measured breath. Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, no longer demanding attention, as if it sensed that something more important was unfolding inside the house. The young man hadn't noticed when he stopped shivering. The warmth was no longer just from the tea or the room, it had settled somewhere deeper beneath his skin. He sat quietly now, his cup empty, his thoughts drifting. Across from him, the old man remained still, his gaze fixed on the small flame of a lamp on the table between them. There was something different in the air. The conversation had faded into silence, but it wasn't an ending. It felt more like a pause, one filled with unspoken words. The young man shifted slightly in his chair, suddenly aware of his own breathing, of the way the room seemed smaller, more intimate. The old man cleared his throat. "I don't usually talk this much," he said softly. The young man looked up. "I'm glad you did." The old man smiled faintly, but there was a tension behind it, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. He folded his hands together, then unfolded them as if unsure what to do with them. "There's something I've been thinking about," the old man said. The young man straightened slightly. "Yes." The old man didn't speak right away. His eyes drifted toward the window, then back to the young man's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but careful. "You don't have to answer," he said. "And you don't have to stay if it makes you uncomfortable." A quiet unease stirred in the young man's chest, not fear but anticipation. "You can ask," he said gently. The old man took a slow breath. "Tonight," he began, "you walked into my house like someone seeking shelter from the rain. But I think, perhaps you were seeking something else too. Even if you didn't know it." The young man frowned slightly, confused but attentive. "I've lived alone for many years," the old man continued. "Not because I wanted to be, but because I convinced myself it was easier. Safer." He paused. "Loneliness becomes familiar after a while. Almost comfortable." The young man nodded slowly. He understood that more than he expected. "And then you knocked on my door," the old man said. And suddenly the house felt alive again. The young man's heart skipped. He wasn't sure how to respond. "I didn't mean to disturb your peace." "You didn't," the old man replied quickly. "You reminded me of it." Silence fell again, thicker this time. The lamp flickered softly, shadows moving across the walls. The young man felt his pulse quicken, his mind racing with questions he couldn't quite form. The old man leaned forward slightly. His voice lowered, not in secrecy but in sincerity. "I find myself drawn to you," he said. "Not just as a guest. Not just as someone passing through." The young man's breath caught. He stared at the old man, his thoughts colliding. Surprise. Uncertainty. And beneath it all, an unexpected calm. "I want to be honest," the old man said. "Because honesty is the only way I know how to live now." The young man swallowed. "I appreciate that." The old man hesitated, then finally spoke the words that had been weighing on him all night. "You matter to me," he said. "And I was wondering, would you be willing to be my friend?" The question was simple, gentle, and yet it landed with the force of something much larger. Friend. The young man felt a strange rush of emotions. Part of him had expected something more complicated, something heavier. And yet, he sensed that the word carried layers beneath it, possibilities unspoken but not denied. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. That surprised him. In the past, questions like this, questions that hinted at closeness, had frightened him. He had learned to keep people at a distance to protect himself from disappointment. But tonight felt different. There was no pressure here, no demand. Just an open door waiting. He looked back up at the old man. "I don't think you're asking too much," the young man said slowly. "I think you're asking at the right time." The old man's expression softened, relief flickering across his face. "Yes," the young man continued, his voice firmer now. "I'd like that. I'd like to be your friend." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the old man let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, soft and full of emotion. "Thank you," he said. Something shifted then, subtle but undeniable. The space between them felt different, charged with a new awareness. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't just host and guest. The old man stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street. "It's strange," he said. "How one question can change the direction of an entire life." The young man rose as well, standing beside him at a respectful distance. "Sometimes," he said, We're waiting our whole lives to be asked. They stood there together, watching the night breathe. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving behind a quiet stillness. The young man realized that he wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. The idea no longer pulled at him with urgency. Friendship was a beginning, and both of them knew it. What neither of them said aloud, but both felt deeply, was that some questions once asked never truly end. They echo forward, shaping every step that follows. And in that quiet moment, with the storm finally at rest, two lives shifted gently onto a new path, one that neither of them would ever walk alone again. The word friend lingered in the room long after it was spoken, settling gently between them like a fragile promise. It did not feel small or limiting. Instead, it felt open, wide enough to hold everything they were not yet ready to name. The old man returned to his chair, and the young man followed, though they now sat a little closer than before. The space between them had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Neither of them spoke right away. The lamp on the table cast a soft glow, turning the room golden. Shadows rested calmly against the walls, no longer restless. The clock continued its steady ticking, but time itself seemed less important now, as if the night had decided to slow down for them. "I haven't had a friend in a very long time," the old man said quietly, almost to himself. The young man turned to him. "I think I've had people around me," he said, "but I'm not sure I've had many friends either." The old man nodded, understanding the difference. "Sometimes closeness isn't about how long you've known someone," he said. "It's about how deeply you recognize each other." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither looked away. The young man felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. It wasn't sudden or overwhelming. It was soft, like warmth spreading slowly through cold hands. He noticed the lines on the old man's face more clearly now, not as signs of age but as traces of a life fully lived. There was kindness there, patience, and a quiet strength that felt steady, grounding. He realized he felt safe. They began talking again, but the tone had shifted. The conversation grew more personal, more present. They spoke of small things, music they loved, books that had once meant everything to them, moments in life that had shaped who they were. The old man shared stories of joy and loss, of learning when to hold on and when to let go. The young man listened, deeply moved by the honesty offered so freely. "You listen like it matters," the old man said at one point. "It does," the young man replied without hesitation. Another silence followed, but this one felt different from the earlier pauses. It was filled with awareness, with something gently unfolding. The young man became conscious of how close they were sitting now, close enough that he could feel the warmth of the old man's arm beside his. He didn't move away. The old man noticed. He always noticed small things. "Is this okay?" he asked softly. The question wasn't about distance alone. The young man considered it for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "It is." The old man's hand rested on the table, palm open, relaxed. Without fully realizing what he was doing, the young man placed his own hand near it, not touching, just close enough to acknowledge the invitation. Their fingers brushed. This time the contact lingered. It was not hurried, not uncertain. Just a quiet meeting of skin and warmth, a simple connection that carried more meaning than any grand gesture could have. The young man felt his breath catch, not from fear but from recognition. The old man's hand was warm, steady. He did not tighten his grip. He did not pull away. He simply let the moment exist. "I didn't expect this," the young man admitted softly. "Neither did I," the old man replied. "But some things arrive when we stop resisting them." They sat like that for a while, hands lightly touching, the world outside completely forgotten. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving behind a deep, peaceful quiet. The young man felt as though something inside him, something he had kept locked away, was slowly opening. He turned to look at the old man again. Their faces were closer now, close enough that he could see the reflection of the lamp in the old man's eyes. "There's something I feel," the young man said carefully. "And I don't know what to call it yet." The old man smiled gently. "You don't have to name it," he said. "Just feel it." The young man nodded. That felt right. The moment unfolded naturally, without urgency. When the old man leaned in slightly, it wasn't with expectation, it was with permission. The young man closed the distance between them, his movement just as slow, just as thoughtful. Their first kiss was soft and brief. It carried no demand, no claim. It was a question more than an answer, a quiet affirmation of what they both already knew. When they pulled back, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The young man felt a warmth spread through his chest, something bright and tender. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. For the first time in a long while he felt certain, not about the future but about the present. The old man rested his forehead lightly against the young man's, a gesture filled with affection and respect. "Whatever this becomes," he said softly, "it will happen at your pace." The young man smiled. "At our pace," he corrected gently. They sat together until the lamp burned low, sharing quiet words and comfortable silences. Outside, the night rested peacefully as if the storm had never existed at all. And in that old house, in the stillness after rain, first love didn't arrive as fire or thunder. It arrived as warmth, as trust, as two hearts choosing gently and without fear to draw closer. Morning arrived quietly without ceremony. The first light of dawn slipped through the thin curtains, pale and hesitant, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The house, which had felt suspended outside of time during the night, slowly returned to the rhythm of the world. The clock ticked louder now. The air felt cooler. Reality, patient and persistent, had begun to knock. The young man opened his eyes and lay still for a moment, listening. The rain was gone. In its place was a deep, unsettling silence, the kind that follows after something important has happened. For a brief, fragile second, he wondered if the night had been a dream. But then he felt it, the memory of warmth, of connection, of a closeness that had felt more real than anything he had known before. He sat up slowly. The old man was already awake, standing near the window with a cup of tea in his hands, looking out at the street washed clean by the storm. His posture was calm, but there was a heaviness in his stillness, as though he too felt the shift from night to morning. "Good morning," the young man said softly. The old man turned and smiled. "Good morning." They shared a quiet look, gentle but cautious now. The night had allowed honesty without consequence. Morning demanded answers. They sat at the table again, but the atmosphere had changed. Not colder, just clearer. The young man felt a tightening in his chest, a sense that something precious stood on uncertain ground. "The roads will be clear now," the old man said, not looking at him. "You'll be able to get home." The word home landed heavily. The young man nodded, though he hadn't yet decided what home meant anymore. "Yes," he said. "I suppose I should go." Silence stretched between them. This time it carried fear. The young man stared at his hands, remembering the ease of the night before, the way closeness had felt natural and unforced. In daylight, doubts crept in. Questions he had kept buried now surfaced one by one. What will people say? What does this mean? Can something like this survive outside these walls? He wasn't the only one thinking these thoughts. The old man set his cup down carefully, as if the smallest sound might shatter something fragile. "There are things you should consider," the old man said gently. "The world is not always kind to what it doesn't understand." The young man looked up. "You mean us?" "Yes," the old man replied honestly. "I've lived long enough to know how quickly people judge. How easily they can turn curiosity into cruelty." The young man swallowed. "Are you afraid?" The old man considered the question. "I'm not afraid for myself," he said. "I'm afraid for you." The word struck deeper than expected. "I don't want you to feel trapped," the old man continued, "or burdened by something you didn't ask for. You have your whole life ahead of you." The young man stood suddenly restless. He walked toward the window, staring out at the quiet street. It looked ordinary now, safe, harmless. And yet it represented everything that frightened him. "I've spent my whole life doing what's expected of me," he said, "walking the paths that felt acceptable. And still I felt empty." He turned back. "Last night? I didn't feel empty." The old man's eyes softened, but he said nothing. "I'm scared," the young man admitted. "Not of you. Of the world. Of the noise, the opinions, the labels." The old man nodded. "That fear is real. But so is this," the young man said, gesturing between them. "Whatever this is." The old man exhaled slowly, the weight of years evident in the movement. "Sometimes," he said, "loving someone means letting them go before they even ask." The young man's heart tightened. "Is that what you want?" "No," the old man said immediately. Then after a pause, "It's what I'm prepared to do if that's what you need." The room fell silent again. The young man closed his eyes. He thought of the life waiting for him outside, familiar, predictable, lonely. Then he thought of the night, the conversations, the trust, the gentle way his heart had opened without force. He took a deep breath. "What if I choose to stay?" he asked. The old man looked up sharply. "You don't owe me that." "I know," the young man said. "That's why it has to be my choice." He walked back to the table and sat down, meeting the old man's gaze directly. "I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know how hard it will be. But I do know that walking away from this would hurt more than facing the world with it. The old man's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you sure? The young man nodded. For the first time in a long time, yes. Emotion flickered across the old man's face, relief, disbelief, gratitude, and something deeper. He reached across the table but stopped just short, giving the young man space to pull back if he wished. The young man closed the distance himself, placing his hand over the old man's. I'm not asking for promises, the young man said. Just honesty. And time. The old man squeezed his hand gently. That I can give. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting light into the room. It illuminated two people standing at the edge of something uncertain, something fragile, but also something real. The decision had been made. Not to ignore the fear. Not to deny the difficulties. But to face them, together. And sometimes, that choice alone is the bravest kind of love. Time did not change everything at once. It moved quietly like the rain had that night, soft, patient, persistent. The young man did not leave that morning. Not because the world outside had disappeared, but because something inside him had settled. He made the call he had been dreading, postponed what could be postponed, and chose, again and again, to stay. At first it was just for a day. Then another. And then it no longer felt like staying at someone else's house. It felt like living. The old house slowly adapted to two lives instead of one. A second cup remained on the table. Shoes rested beside each other near the door. Laughter, quiet, unforced, began to fill the spaces that had once been empty. The house did not resist the change. It welcomed it. They moved carefully at first. There were boundaries, conversations, moments of doubt that required honesty instead of fear. They learned each other's rhythms. The old man's early mornings and thoughtful silences, the young man's restless energy and late-night reflections. They learned how to disagree without hurting, how to give space without drifting apart. Love, they discovered, was not dramatic. It was steady. Some days were simple. They cooked together, shared meals that stretched into long conversations, sat side by side reading different books but somehow feeling connected through the silence. Other days were harder. The world outside did not always understand. There were looks that lingered too long, questions that carried judgment, moments when the young man felt the weight of being seen differently. On those days, the old man would place a hand on his shoulder and say, "You are not wrong for being honest about your heart." And on days when the old man felt the ache of age, the quiet fear of time slipping forward too quickly, the young man would sit beside him and say, "You are not a burden. You are my choice." They did not hide, but they did not perform either. Their love existed first within the walls of that house, strong enough to face the world when necessary, but never dependent on its approval. Years passed. The young man grew steadier, more confident. He built a life that reflected who he truly was, not who he was expected to be. The old man grew lighter, as though the years he carried had finally found a place to rest. He laughed more. He dreamed again. They took walks in the evenings, sometimes in silence, sometimes hand in hand. They returned to that first rainy street more than once, standing across from the door where everything had begun. Each time the young man would smile and say, "I almost didn't knock. And I almost didn't open," the old man would reply. But they had. And that had made all the difference. As time moved forward, the lines on the old man's face deepened, but they softened too, etched now with joy instead of loneliness. The young man learned patience, learned how love could be both gentle and enduring. They grew into each other, not losing themselves but expanding. There were moments of fear, hospital rooms, quiet nights when the future felt uncertain. But fear no longer stood alone. It was shared. And shared fear, they learned, loses its power. One evening years later, rain returned. Not as a storm but as a calm, steady fall. They sat by the window, watching the droplets trace familiar paths down the glass. The house felt full, not with things but with memories. "Do you ever regret it?" the young man asked softly. The old man turned to him, surprised. "Regret what?" "Choosing this life," he said. "Choosing me." The old man smiled, reaching for his hand with the same care he had shown all those years ago. "I regret the years I spent believing love had an expiration date," he said. "Not a single moment since." The young man leaned his head against the old man's shoulder. He realized then that forever was not a promise made once. It was a decision renewed quietly every day. When the world grew heavy, they returned to the simple things. Shared tea, shared silence, shared breath. Love did not need to be loud to last. It needed truth, and kindness, and the courage to keep choosing each other. In time, the young man became the steady one, offering strength where it was needed most. And the old man who had once opened his door to a stranger in the rain, found himself surrounded by a life he had never thought possible. Their story was not written in grand gestures or dramatic endings. It lived in mornings and nights, in care and patience, in the quiet miracle of two souls finding home in each other. And if anyone were to ask how it all began, the answer would always be the same. On a rainy night, with a knock on a door, and a choice that lasted a lifetime.